Actually, we're up to line Lamed Vav, the last paragraph on page Lamed Vav. V'yize'er me'od shelo levayesh shum adam. Be very careful not to embarrass any person. Because yesterday he was talking a little bit more about like the more subtle forms of embarrassment, like a person should not be embarrassed to do good things, or he certainly should not embarrass other people so that they should not do good things. Or the same thing applies for bad things. Because, for example, you could be in a group of friends or a family where a person feels embarrassed to do the right thing. Yes. He's made to feel like a nerd, or he's made to feel like geeky. So that would be a more subtle form of embarrassment. Even though embarrassment in general is a good thing, it would be wrong to be embarrassed because of people embarrassed to do the right thing. No, you should have fortitude and strength and happy to do what's right, and be willing to subject yourself to being embarrassed if need be, in order to do the mitzvah of Hashem. But now he's going into more of the more obvious thing about embarrassing, which is being very careful not to embarrass other people. Ki yomu chachamim, it was said by the sages, hamalbin es pnei chavero, somebody who causes his friend's face to become white in embarrassment, barabim, in public, ein lo chelek le'olam haba. Such a person has no portion in the world to come. He's clearly not talking about accidental. If a person accidentally embarrassed somebody, even embarrassed them very seriously in front of other people, that wasn't his intention. So it's a harmful thing.
Previous embarrassment, that's bad when you plan to embarrass.
Yes, when you plan to embarrass, but when you do it intentionally, that's what he's talking about. Avaka retzichohi, halbanas panim, and embarrassing someone smacks of murder. Why? Because in a way you're drawing the blood. Causing the face to become white is like causing the blood to be drawn from that person, and that's kind of like a mini murder.
Like comes on, bar comes on. That's so, yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's right. And the point here is that it's very serious. It's considered to be somewhat like a mini murder. Yes. You're causing the person's blood to be drained. Ki ozil sumka v'osi chivra, because the blood goes, the red goes, and the white comes. V'domi l'retzicha, and that's like murder. V'chen amru chachamim od, and the sages said further, tsar halbona mar mimaves. The anguish from being embarrassed is bitter or more bitter than death. Like people would say, I thought I was going to die. I was so embarrassed. Very good. You hear he always has the right phrase. Yeah. You're very canny with that.
Thank you very much.
I'm dying with embarrassment. How did you say it?
You like to say, I could have died of embarrassment.
Yes, I could have died of embarrassment. That's a phrase people use. I could have died with embarrassment. Alken yapil adam es atzmo letoch kivshan ha'esh, and therefore a person should rather throw himself into a fiery furnace, val yalbin pnei chaveru rabim, and he should, but should not embarrass his friend in public. That kind of implies that a person should more readily accept embarrassment himself, than embarrass somebody else.
It's a vicious circle, embarrassment as well, because when you're embarrassed, like in previous in my secular life, then you try and push embarrassment on someone else to take the embarrassment off yourself. So that creates a vicious cycle.
Well, you weren't here yesterday, were you?
No.
That's exactly what we saw yesterday. He did it again. Just yesterday, we saw that very point, that a person will use embarrassment to deflect the embarrassment that he has. Yeah. Right? So he'll kind of try and deflect the embarrassment that he's feeling by causing other people to become embarrassed. So it becomes, like you said, a vicious circle. And a person should rather himself suffer pain and anguish comparable to being thrown into a furnace and not cause another person the pain and the anguish of being embarrassed. We find this, for example, regarding Yehuda and Tamar. I think we spoke about not too long ago, where, if you remember, Yehuda's daughter-in-law was Tamar, who he gave to marry his oldest son. And that was Er. And because he wanted to preserve Tamar's beauty, he wanted to avoid her becoming pregnant, and therefore spilled his seed rather than her becoming pregnant. And since he spilled his life fluid, his life was also spilled, and his life was taken by God. It doesn't say that explicitly in the Torah, but it does say that regarding the second son, who also spilled his seed, and it said, and God killed him as well, from which we derive that the same reason which is said about Onan, who spilled his seed, and was therefore killed, it's for that same reason that the first son was also killed.
So halachically, you're not allowed to spill your seed outside of your wife.
That's right. That's right, and it's considered to be very serious. In this case, these two people were punished because of that very seriously. So Yehuda did not realize that his sons were doing this, and he thought that the problem was with her. She had bad mazel. She was the type of woman who was a husband killer, not necessarily because she was a nasty woman, but because her mazel was such that that her husbands die. And there is such a concept in Jewish sources. So rather than giving her his third son, Shelah, to marry, he pushed her off and delayed her. And when she saw that she was being pushed off, as you remember, she posed as the prostitute.
Yes, to get his seed. I remember the story now.
And as it turned out, she actually became pregnant from Yehuda, her father-in-law. So he at the time paid her wages with his staff and with his signet, which our sources say is referring to his tefillin. But in any case, after 3 months, when her belly was rounded, she was accused and suspected by Yehuda of having committed adultery. And her being the daughter of an important person, he decreed that she should be punished as an adulteress. And she was therefore publicly kind of accused and threatened with this very severe punishment. And she did not say who the real culprit was. She just said,
She suffered the embarrassment.
yes, the owner of these objects is the father of my child, giving you the opportunity to own up or not. Now he recognized the objects and said, Tzadka mimeni, she's more righteous than me. Another way of reading it is Tzadka mimeni, she's right, the child is from me. In any case, this was the prototype example of a person who was willing to be thrown into a fiery furnace, the punishment that she would have received as an adulteress, rather than causing Yehuda the embarrassment. Yeah, for his own deed, which he did. But he owned up, and as a result, there are different opinions about whether he ultimately maintained his relationship with her and married her instead of his son Shelah, or did not. But in any case, she did have children from that union, as we mentioned, and that was Zerach and Peretz. Yeah. Gam b'divrei Torah, I believe. We're at the top of page Lamed Zayin. Af al pi shehotziuhu lisaref lo rotzuso. Excuse me. First line, halfway through, after the period, it says Velom dumi tamar. This concept of throwing oneself into the fiery furnace rather than causing another person embarrassment, we learned from Tamar, which is what I just spelled out. Af al pi shehotziuhu lisaref, even though she was taken to be burned, lo rotzuso lahal b'im pnei Yehuda. She didn't want to embarrass Yehuda. And even in a place where a person is justified in giving a rebuke, the Torah said, Lo siso alav chet. Don't heap upon him sin. Which means, if you have to rebuke, but rebuke in a way which you're not going to cause the person embarrassment. And that's even when you're justified. Ketzad, for example, how? Tochiach mitachila beseser uvenachas. Initially, you should offer your rebuke in private and gently, subtly. Avalim tochicheu mitachila berabim usivayasheno. But if he starts from the outset, rebuking him in public and embarrassing him, az tekabel alav chet, then the person who's giving the rebuke will actually receive transgression. What's transgression? Transgression of causing him embarrassment.
Yeah.
And I believe it's also explained that the very transgression that he's rebuking him over will be transferred from him to the one who's rebuking. All the more so, a person who causes embarrassment to a friend when he's not rebuking him, that's a horrible thing. For Churban Yerushalayim nisgalgel al yedei boishes devar kamtza. And here again, Tuvia, third time in a row, he's on a roll. Right, refers here. Yes, the Yerushalayim was destroyed because of the embarrassment that was caused because of kamtza and bar kamtza. Therefore, a person has to be very careful. To do anything which is going to cause another person embarrassment. It's pretty difficult. You have to be quite sensitive because you really don't never know who's going to be sensitive or embarrassed about what. It's hard to know. I mean, there are obvious things, of course, but there are more subtle things. And still, we have to be very careful, be aware not to cause another person embarrassment. Sometimes it happens that people are joking around. And you say things in the spirit of the joke. And then all of a sudden, you see the guy's like, his face drops.
So everyone's got different levels of
fixing. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, man. I was only joking. You have to be careful. If that's how you feel about joking, so let other people joke about you. But don't use that as permission to joke about other people. Only joking? Apply that about yourself. Oh, they were only joking. But don't use that. Why are you looking with consternation?
I'm trying to gather the context. Like, if a person is sensitive, use your own sensitivities to apply to what jokes you give out, or if you're joking towards other people, joke towards yourself first.
I think I meant both things in a way. The first thing is certainly true. Try and be sensitive to the sensitivities of others. But the second thing I meant to say more that, if a person finds that he's kind of often in a situation where he says, oh, I'm sorry, it was just a joke. I was only joking. So then let him adopt that philosophy about it's being only a joke regarding what people say about him. But not...
So don't be self-conscious.
But not to use that to rely upon embarrassing other people. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, your own medicine. Oh, I was only joking. Don't take it. How would you feel? Mm-hmm. Would you apply that philosophy to yourself? And if the answer is yes, then go ahead, apply it to yourself. But don't apply it to other people. Don't joke at their expense and then apologize and say it was only a joke. And if you want to rely on the explanation that it was only a joke, so use that regarding things that are addressed to you, but not as a basis to address, these kind of jeering remarks to other people. What were you going to say?
I think we hit in another class this morning. Lots of people have the misconception that because they're a certain way, everyone else is that way.
Because they're what?
Because they're a certain way and they've got...
they're a certain way.
You judge other people on your own standards and your own ways, which is a bad misconception. It's an idiosyncrasy in the human character. So I think when you said humility and humbleness is important, I think we should always try and be aware of other people's feelings and their sensitivity levels and how they're going to take or...
That's very nice.
Situation,
Yeah, because it's true. It is natural. We do tend to view the world and view the other people the way we view ourselves. But everyone's different, so it's important to try and live out of that box, and recognize maybe how and who you are, but don't have that jade your perception of how and who other people are. This is common between men and women. There are obvious differences between men and women, not only biological but emotional and psychological and things like this. And the sages say that a person should honor his wife more than himself. Why? Because a man, generally, might tolerate certain things and say, well, my wife should be the same way. Other people should be like me. But that's not true. A person should be sensitive to the fact that women might be, or generally are, more sensitive or need different types of comfort in zones and things like that. So it says, Oyev ishto kagufo umechabdo yoser megufo. He should love his wife as himself and respect her even more than himself. Loving her as yourself, because generally people have no lack of love for themselves. Respect her even more than yourself, because a man, wants a certain degree of respect, but he should be willing to respect his wife even more than that. A guy says, look, I can have the same, jeans for a year. I don't need, a woman, she needs to change, different clothing and new stuff and change of styles and stuff like that. Well, you can't say, well, like, why does she have to be buying new clothes? I mean, that she doesn't need to do that.
Yeah, they've got different motivation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's I don't do that. Or, a guy might, whether it's biological or whether it's society's conditioning, but a guy might push himself more than a woman is used to pushing herself. Not that women can't push themselves and have fortitude, because they certainly can and they do. But in certain ways, even if it's only societal, many societies kind of demand men to push harder. So he might expect his wife to be able to push that hard. But she wasn't raised that way, or that's not part of her genes, or it wasn't part of her social conditioning, and therefore you can't expect the same type of a thing. In terms of whether it might have things having to do with physical stamina, work around the house. You want to do more, but you can't push her to more than she can because you can do more than her. Gam b'divrei Torah, im yisa v'yiten im chavero. Also regarding words of Torah, if he's communicating, exchanging words of Torah, v'shamash chavero to'ah, and he heard that his friend made a mistake, lo yomar lo to'iso. He shouldn't say to him, you wrong. You just made a mistake. That's not right. That's actually not right. You shouldn't do that. Oh, ein chamevin, or you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, kiyotzebe, or other types of things. Shelo yizbayesh, in order not to embarrass him. Sometimes I'll do that. Like I'll ask a trick question, and then people get the answer wrong. Maybe that's wrong. It's not right to do that because somewhere you might be causing people embarrassment. And if it's in the spirit of it's fun, could be that's wrong. Like the common one, the Jerusalem Talmud was written in. Everybody says Jerusalem. Wrong. It was written in Tiberias. Maybe if it's said in a joking, way, and you give the people, some inkling by your intonation that it's a trick question. Yeah. So they had a chance to not answer if they wanted, and they got an answer, so maybe it would be okay. But in any case, you have to be careful not to put other people down. Rather, how should he correct him? Because in the end of the day, you do want to try and correct a wrong. Rather, he should make himself as if he didn't understand that he made a mistake. The person said something, that's a great idea. You mean, and it's actually different than what the person actually said, but in this way, the person's he's corrected. He realizes that maybe what he said was incorrect. But you're playing it off in a way. I don't know. Some people might consider that to be manipulative behavior. Are you comfortable with that, Jeremy?
I mean, I'm a very blunt person. So say I was talking to a friend the other night, people who have different social skills, some people might say, I don't like apples. But when another personality type is offered apples, they might be like, well, do you have any pears instead? Trying to misdirect. So my communication style is more they offer me an apple, no thanks, I don't like those. And if they want to offer me a pear or whatever,
that's fine. Interesting, yeah.
So it's and also when people are too misdirective and not blunt like I am, sometimes it's irritating. But depends on the level of communication, I guess. When you're saying you use trick questions, I've been in your class when you've done that, and sometimes it's to help us remember.
Yeah.
As opposed to just throw a factoid at you.
Yeah, or to kind of just spark, maybe just to get people back on track, or yeah.
Sometimes it has purpose, but sometimes it's just.
I suppose if you don't like you said, if you call someone embarrassment without any bad intention, then it's not a bad thing, like you said earlier. That's more the person's character and their own makeup.
Because here you're kind of saying, here the author might be saying that somebody says something incorrect. And so you make yourself as if you didn't understand, and you might kind of wash it over and also let the person know what they said is incorrect by saying it correct, thinking, giving them the impression that you thought they said something that they didn't really say.
But maybe if they was very perceptive, it would come across as condescending to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the point. But a person might object that that's kind of condescending. In which case, Jeremy's approach would be better, which is, look, you can be straightforward and direct without being abusive or offensive.
But someone with bad people skills and who's shy and insensitive might find bluntness and will hurt if not necessarily embarrassing, but hurt their feelings.
Yeah. So the person who offers an apple, and his response is, since he doesn't like apples, he says, "Well, do you have any pears?" If he were offering the apple and somebody said to him, "I don't like apples," he would probably feel slighted. That's why he says, "I don't." That's why he doesn't say, "I don't like apples." He asks, "Do you have pears?"
That's like coming back to judging people by your understanding. That's interesting.
It's true, because I personally would not say I don't like apples, because I would feel like the person might feel bad that I don't want what they've offered me. I would say I'm not hungry, or if I hadn't, but it's true that the other people might be more than happy if they say, no, I'm glad they might make the mental note. I'm glad he told me he doesn't like apples, so next time I won't offer.
Or some people offer with ill will and they'll be glad you said no. They just offer because it's the right thing to do. Really, they don't want you to their fruit. They'll just offer because it's the right thing to do. You get them people as well. Or
you're at your friend's house for dinner, and the mother serves dinner, which is awful, but you have it because you want to be respectful, and because you ate the first plate, she gives you a second.
Yeah, you just put it to the dog at the time.
You might be better off saying, no thank you.
Yeah, that was lovely.
Yeah, I've had to learn to kind of curb my bluntness a little bit, so instead of like, I change it with prefer. So if somebody's like, you want this? I'm like, oh, I don't prefer that. I'm like, oh, if you don't prefer this, they might offer something. I just swap words out.
I prefer a date.
It's amazing the life skills you can get out of Torah and Jewish studies, really, isn't it? Because it can make you better in every aspect of your life, like more humble, more aware of other people's feelings.
And the truth is, both approaches have truth to them and might be appropriate in different situations with different people. With certain people, a more blunt approach might actually be better, and for other people, a more indirect approach might be better. So it might be better if a person is aware of, or at least tries to be aware of, what would be the best response for this person or this scenario.
Try and sum up the person and think how to react.
In certain scenarios with certain people, being more direct is better, and for others, perhaps being somewhat indirect is better. So rather than thinking about what I think is best, trying to ascertain what do I think that this person would think is best. Because
you get people like Jeremy was saying earlier, when they beat around the bush and try and pander to your needs, some people find that irritating. Like, just be straight. So there's so many different makeups in the human character.
That's good.
I'm aware of what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Okay. So, however, here the author is saying that a person should take the more indirect approach. And he shouldn't give a nickname to his friend either, in order not to embarrass him. Unless he wants to talk about somebody who has such a nickname, gam shelo b'fanav, if it's not in front of him. Yomar ploni b'mkom ploni, o beno shel ploni, o yomar simonim ad she'nikar zulas akinui. So let's say he's short. Don't call him Shorty. And even if people call him Shorty, I'm understanding from this, even if it's not in front of him, you should not refer to him as Shorty. Yeah. But find some other way to address him without using that nickname.
Or if I don't know his name, so you could do it, you say, the guy he's not very tall, or you could do it in a sensitive way. If you're saying to that person, like, who's he, and you're trying to remind him who it is.
Yeah. Find some neutral way to refer, the new guy, or the guy who lives on 56th Street. Or Yomar Simonim Achie Nikar Zula Sekinui, or find some other type of indication, a way of describing him aside from using that nickname. It might be that the problem with the nicknames is particularly when the nicknames are pejorative. But if they call somebody like, whatever, the lion, yeah. So if he feels good about that nickname, so maybe that would be okay. As long as if it's being if the intention is something good. But even if that's the case, generally speaking, nicknames should avoid it because people are given Jewish names, and those Jewish names are the names that should be used. So that if his name is Yaakov, you should call him Yaakov and not Kobe.
Yeah.
That Kobe would be kind of a nickname. It's a diminutive, I think, meaning it's a shortened version of a name. Yeah.
Is that acceptable? Like, say your name's like Tovia, they say Tov, like, or is that acceptable when you just shorten the person's name? Get a
No,
diminutive
I'm saying even if you use those, I think it's called a diminutive.
a derivative or a diminutive.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So you kind of make a shorter version of a person's name. Michael becomes Mickey.
Yeah.
So no, his name is Michael. Yeah, and you shouldn't abbreviate it to Mickey. But people do that all the time. Rivka, they call her Ricky. Things like that. So even if it's not a problem in terms of actually using the nickname because it's not a pejorative nickname, it still be avoided because you're not referring to the person by his or her real Hebrew name.
So according to this plan, it's safe to just calling someone their name.
That's what you should say. That's what it's called. That's what it's called. And even a person has two names, like Menachem Mendel. So some people call him Meni because of Menachem. But even Menachem is not enough because his real name is Menachem Mendel. If a person has two names, you're really supposed to use both names.
Oh, really? So if you have a middle name, you have to use both?
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about Hebrew names. Yeah. You don't have to, but it's a good idea to refer to a person by his or her full name. Even if that's not done, in the case of a man, he makes an aliyah to the Torah, at least from time to time, he's called up by his full name. Menachem Mendel, Ben Baruch, for example. But Eli, there is a name, Eli, but Eli could be used as a short for Eliyahu. It really should be Eli, because you should call the person Eliyahu. Now the person might prefer to be called Eli, not Eliyahu. So it becomes a bit tricky. If they prefer it, then I guess perhaps you should do it. But in general, it's good to refer to people's Hebrew names and not their slave names. And even when it's the Hebrew names, it should be the full Hebrew name and not just the one name if they've got two, both names. Mark is often Mordecai. Mark is often short for Mordecai. It often goes together.
Everyone call me Tovi Yaakov from now and then.
Tuvi Yaakov? Is that your name, Tuvi Yaakov?
Terry Jack in English. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So Tuvi Yaakov, is a very nice name. But people, it's nice if people can get themselves to a point where, at least in certain company, they're used to and actually prefer to be referred to by their Hebrew names. Yeah.
I think the yeshiva is a great starting place for that.
Yeah, that's right. It's true, 100%. You have a name like Michael. I mean, the Hebrew pronunciation is Michael.
My brother's name.
Is that right? Or Joel. Joel. Those are kind of like English forms of the Hebrew name. But if a person has a name, which is not in any way really Jewish, but they have an additional Hebrew name, it would be nice if from time to time, at least in certain environments, like I said, they tried to have people use that name. Like he might be named Sean, which is not a particularly Jewish name as far as names are concerned, but his Hebrew name is Asher.
Right.
So I prefer to be called Asher. A little way past midway in that middle paragraph.
Right.
V'lo yomar adam berabim o b'yechidi ploni rotza liten li bitoy v'ani lo ratzisi oisa. This person shouldn't say in public, "Oh, he wanted to suggest his daughter's hand in marriage to me, but I didn't want her." That's not nice. What does everybody have to know that? And it's like a slight to the honor of the young lady. Ki b'zehu noisen kavod la'atzmo. He's taking honor for himself, uboshes l'havero, and causing embarrassment to his friend. He's lifting himself up while simultaneously putting his friend down. And therefore he should be careful in all ways that nobody should receive embarrassment through his words. A person should always be rather prepared to be the ones who are at the receiving end of embarrassment and not the giving end. Or they hear they're being disrespected, but they don't respond. And regarding such people, it says, the that those who love God, or those who are loved by God, because of their humility, because of their willingness to accept embarrassment, ultimately they will burst forth in glory like the rising sun. Mida keneged mida, and this is what we call mida keneged mida, commensurate to the way they behave. Yan asher shama cherposoi v'nehefechu fonav leyirakon, since they hear themselves being embarrassed, and as a result, without responding, their faces turn green, Yavhikem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God will bring their faces light. Yoiser me'or shemesh, more so than the light of the sun itself. Kinyan shenemar, as it says, Uchvod Hashem olayich zarach, and the glory of God upon you will shine. Mimidas abusha yagir la'anava, through the quality or the attribute of embarrassment, a person will also attain humility. We've kind of been going back and forth between humility and embarrassment. And since embarrassment brings humility, it's interesting that the author brings his discussion about embarrassment after humility. But that's part of it. Why? Because he will kind of subjugate himself, meaning lower himself before others because of his embarrassment, and then achieve the quality of modesty. A person who's embarrassed will be embarrassed to do his things in public, and that would be a quality of modesty. A person who's walking through the street, chomping on food, whether it be a pizza, a slice of pizza, or a falafel, or something like this, walking around. So, a person is like very careless and very kind of carefree and very kind of, fluid and everything like this. But they're lacking a great degree of modesty. They're not even aware of kind of this demonstrative behavior that they're doing out in public like that. Where a more refined person would actually naturally feel a certain degree of embarrassment by doing that. They would rather be engaged in these needs of theirs more in private. And the same thing has to do with all types of affections that people show. You go out in public, you see people showing affection to one another in very graphic ways. There's no busha, no embarrassment whatsoever. It's brazen. Why should everybody... why should they expose themselves to the public eye with what they're doing, totally oblivious or caring of what, and in a way, regardless of what it does to themselves, it degrades the actual act itself. Something which is done in the streets, like cats in the gutter, the same thing, right? But a person who has just a drop of humility, of modesty, would feel that that's inappropriate, and it actually degrades the quality of that act, something that should be done in private, in the proper context.
I thought of an interesting concept there, Rabbi, if I can speak. You got a second? When I was younger, I would be embarrassed to scoff my face in front of people I didn't know. Because I think maybe when you're younger, your soul's cleaner. It hasn't been tarnished by the wicked of the world. Because now, when you get old in the secular world, you'll eat walking along the road, you'll eat your food in front of anyone. But I think when you're younger, maybe you're spiritually more clean, so you haven't been corrupted by the wicked of the world.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I used to be I just naturally feel humble to eat in front of
people. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Well, you probably have a special soul too.
Thank you very much.
But it's true. It's true. Young people's, spiritually are much less tainted. We become calloused in the world. Think about the bottom of a baby's foot, as opposed to the bottoms of our feet. We walk barefoot and we got all calloused and everything like that. A child, the baby's foot is very soft. So on the one hand, that makes them more susceptible. On the other hand, it makes them more sensitive. So there's always going to be that balance between, susceptibility. What's the word I'm looking for?
Susceptibility.
Yes, thank you, and sensitivity. But in any case, therefore, a humble person will get to the degree of modesty. The sages said, "Habanim haksherim haboishis nir al penehem." Kosher children can be recognized by the humility that they have on their faces, their bearing and their countenance. Whereas certain children are chutzpahdik. You see, they're brazen and they're bold and others are humble and embarrassed. You don't want your children. Yeah, you don't want your children to be meek either, but at least they should have a wholesome, natural degree of humility, embarrassment, modesty. Ki mishu baishan usiman shu mezer Avram, Yitzchak v'Yaakov. Because a person who has this embarrassment, he has this modesty, it's a sign. Hey, you did it again. 4th time today.
On a roll.
You're on a roll. It's a sign that he is of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I was thinking the comment you made was not particularly politically correct, so I wasn't going to go there with you. But the author did it, so you were right on the money. Amru Chachamim, we'll try and finish off. Amru Chachamim, habusha noidas be'esel kas. A person's natural embarrassment is recognized at the time that he's angry. Why? Because if he's embarrassed, he won't get angry. If he's modest, he won't get angry. And if he does, it will be mitigated by that humility of his. But if he flies off the handle, it's an indication that either he's not particularly humble as he makes out, or at least he's not able to control himself to the degree that he should do. So modesty is also indicative on a person at a time that he's challenged with different situations. A person should have a degree of humility in front of other people. Even, it sounds like he's saying if it means putting on a mask of humility. And I'm not sure if he means to say that you should fake it, or he just means to say that your countenance should honestly be one of humility in front of other people. But even if it's faking it, even if he means faking it, that's also okay, because our sources do say that the hearts are drawn after the behavior of our bodies. And so even if a person's not naturally humble, but he wants to try and be more modest, he can act that way with the intention of hopefully engendering that quality in him through the exterior actions. That would also be okay. As long as he's not faking it, feigning it to pull the wool over other people's eyes to take advantage of him, he's kind of going through the motions with the hope that will kind of jumpstart the true feeling inside. Hine hu nechba elikelim, and behold, it says regarding King Saul that he was hiding among the barrels in the vessels. Right? They wanted to give him a position of grandeur and glory, and he was hiding among the barrels. Va'el b'chol mechuso, and God chose that humble person to be the king. As it says, Heresem asher b'char bo Hashem. Behold, he who God has chosen, that Shaul, who's hiding behind the barrels. Amru Chachamim, Hamira zos hi mi ma'ale hanefesh hayakara. And this quality is of the elevated aspects of the soul. And therefore it's a quality which you're going to find, like you said, in children, before they're tainted by this worldly types of things. Or you'll find it among people who are naturally spiritual people. V'hilu mas hashlamas aguf, and that is kind of corresponding to the perfection of the body. Umisha misbayesh tigdal ma'alaso, one who is naturally humble and modest, so this attribute will be increased. V'yoser tavchin v'tisboinen, he will be able to have higher powers of discernment and of contemplation as well, because he's more sensitive, and therefore perhaps more sensitive and also patient to observe and reach true conclusions about his environment than other people who really don't care anything about themselves and live kind of a coarse lifestyle, fulfilling needs which are not spiritual needs. Okay, very good. That concludes the last chapter, or the last section of Busha. And next time we'll meet for the next attribute, azus, which is the opposite of modesty, kind of like brazenness. Again, there's two pairs here. There's humility, there's arrogance and humility, and modesty and brazenness. They're related, but they're obviously different. They come here in different chapters.